So hello everybody, welcome to our webinar today titled Open Strategy, Let's Go Beyond the Board with our very esteemed guest, Professor Julia Haltz. My name is Sean McDonald and I'll be your moderator for the next 40 odd minutes. And firstly, thank you for attending today, particularly this time of the afternoon. I know it's difficult for everybody to get organized at this time of the day, but we really appreciate the effort you've made to be here. Now, during our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering these during the session and try to get through as many of these as we have time for. And finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is usual for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering our 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper from our friends at Taken Care Of, worth over $400. Plus, you'll also receive a copy of Julia's book, Open Strategy, Mastering Disruption from Outside the Boardroom. Now, for those not too familiar with BoardPro, we are a board software provider that serve around 20,000 users around the world. And we enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission in life is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. Let me now introduce our fantastic lineup of speakers today, starting with the esteemed Julia Haltz, a strategic management professor at the University of Innsbruck, Austria, is a world-renowned strategist. Her work delves into innovative strategies, approaches to strategy, emphasizing creative openness and the impact of diversity in digital technologies and strategic processes. Recognized by the Brightline Initiative as one of the globe's foremost strategic thinkers, her pioneering research on open strategy was nominated for a prestigious Thinkers Award in 2021. Julia is a leading voice in open strategy scholarship, reshaping the field by demonstrating its transformative influence on strategists' role and competencies. She's also a co-author of Open Strategy, Mastering Disruption from Outside the C-Suite. Her work is being published in the Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and numerous academic journals, including the Strategic Management Journal. Good evening or good afternoon, good morning to you, Julia.
Good morning, Sean.
Steve Bowman is the Managing Director of Conscious Governance, brings a great depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Steve has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books on governance and strategy. G'day to you, Steve.
Hello, everyone from around the world.
Ben Stevens has an extensive background in risk and strategic planning and has spent over 2 decades working in senior roles across a variety of industries, including the recording music industry in London, the TV and broadcast industry in Eastern Europe, and more recently, the payments and telco industry in New Zealand. Ben is a chartered accountant, holds an executive MBA with distinction from Warwick Business School, and has a keen interest in future trends and their impact on traditional business models, and has spoken on the subject of risk, future trends, and business model disruption for the Institute of Directors and CANS. Welcome again to you, Ben.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
All righty, so I will hand over the sharing now to you, Julia.
Thank you very much. So, can you see my slides?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So thank you and welcome, everybody. It's great to be here today and have this opportunity to have this conversation. And I hope we really have a great conversation and discussion. The work that I'm going to present and the insights I'm referring to are the result of, I wouldn't know, say 8 years of research together with colleagues, where we have talked and worked together with companies that somehow managed to open up the strategy process. And this is what I will be talking about today. And throughout the presentation and throughout the slides, I hope to have a discussion with Stephen and Ben, getting their insights and their opinions on open strategy, but of course also your questions and your thoughts on it. So starting with this, the question is, if we have to open up strategy, how does the strategy process looks at the moment? And therefore, I do want to ask all of you to think about two questions and in your mind, come up with some numbers or percentages that you think might answer those questions. So the first one is, what do you believe? What is the percentage of companies that fail or stumble when there is some kind of disruption in the industry? Technological disruption, but also disruption coming in through a very new competitor, and having a hard time either not being profitable, going out of business, being acquired. So what do you think? What's the percentage? Maybe we can have some guesses in the Q&A session. Well, we have 90%, which is high.
Do you want people just to put that in the chat, Julia?
Yeah.
80%, 85%, 30%, 80%, 70%.
Okay.
Quite high.
So let's go on with the second question first, and that would be, what do you think? When we think of all the strategic initiatives that are started and that are created and planned throughout organizations, what is the percentage of strategic initiatives that fail? And here, I mean, they fail that they do not reach the intended outcomes or that they are never implemented and realized at all. What are your guesses? Again, in the chat, maybe. What are percentages?
Wow, 90, 95, 70.
Okay.
75, 65, 80%. So it's very high.
Very high. So let's have a look on the actual numbers. In terms of disruption, it's really more than 2/3 of the companies that are really having a hard time when there is some kind of substantial change or disruption within their industry. And it gets even worse when we have a look at the second question. It depends a little bit based on the source that you refer and the study, but basically numbers are between 50 to 90% of all strategic initiatives that fail. And if you now think about the effort and time that is invested in sketching out and formulating and creating those strategic initiatives, I think that numbers are really kind of concerning, because it shows that a huge percentage of initiatives never reach the intended outcomes. So obviously there is some kind of, I wouldn't say crisis, but let's say problem going on when we come to strategy making. And in our research, when we started out, we saw those numbers. And the first thing was really first to understand what might be reasons. And we identified, let's say, some kind of pathologies or problems of strategy making. And the first problem that really was obvious are biases and groupthink that might come into this kind of work. And here we have to go a little bit back and think about how all our brains are working, because our human brains are fascinating. They can do a lot, but they are also having some kind of very severe limitations. They are very limited in the amount of information they can perceive, they can process, and they can store. Now, to be able to still survive in the complexity of our reality, our brain has come up with some great, let's say, mechanisms. There are, in our brain, we build up so-called cognitive models. So those are patterns or perceptions about how the world works. And those allow us to apply shortcuts, to just be able to handle all those information that is out there, to select information when we make decisions and build our actions on this information. Now, those cognitive models that we build in our heads, they are shaped by our education, by experiences that we make throughout our life, and throughout interactions that we have with others when we talk, when we interact. Now you can think that people that have kind of very similar education, talk to people with the same background and interact with them in the same environment, build up very similar cognitive models. And they are still great. They help us. They are good. But they also can become a severe limitation, because once we have established them, they are very stable. They do not change quickly. And we have a hard time if in our environment things change substantially, as it is with disruption. We can't overcome our established cognitive models, our assumptions about how the world works, about how our company works, about how our industry works. And the people within our company, in our small teams that we interact, are very likely to have the same cognitive models. So we see a lot of examples, and I think there are many famous ones when we think of Nokia, about all the imaging companies that have had a hard time to shift from analog to digital imaging, where we see that those established cognitive models become limitations, and they result then in effects like isomorphism. I don't know who knows what isomorphism is. It's a great phenomenon that shows that we behave similar to those that we interact a lot. So people that live together over years behave similar. You even say that people and their dogs become very similar over the years. But also we see this with companies that are in the same industry, through benchmarking, through looking at each other, behave very similar. And if we think that strategy is about being different, that can become a problem, because it results in the lack of cross-fertilization, a lack of combination of fields. We have the famous silo thinking. So all of those are problems that we see. And just if we think back, there's a great book that investigates the most important inventions in mankind, and has investigated how those inventions have taken place. And this book finds that 82% of those inventions are really based on combining aspects from different fields. So those cognitive models have some kind of danger in there. And a little bit related to that, we also found that in companies and related to strategy work, there is a lack of psychological ownership when we look on employees. And that has to do with the second number that we talked about, the 50 to 90% of initiatives that are never implemented. If we have mostly the small teams of executives, of top managers being engaged with formulating those initiatives and then communicating those initiatives throughout the organization, with the employees being merely passive recipients of that work, you can see already from describing the process that it's hard for them to really buy into those, get emotional about them, commit to them, which are all necessary requirements to get active, to realize. So those are merely the problems that we have identified in our work. And I would love to hear from Ben and Stephen, what are their takes on that, and what are their experiences related to those problems?
So I'll kick off on this one. This notion of biases and groupthink is, I think, more important than a lot of people recognize. You know, we do hundreds of strategic plan facilitations a year, and we've been doing them for a long, long time. And one of the things we've found is to try and minimize groupthink, and I know you'll go into this a bit more detailed, is to actually have not just the senior executives, not just the board, but actually some key stakeholders involved in this as we go along. And you've got some great processes you use, Julia, that we'll talk about later. But the other thing that we find is we actually send out surveys prior to a range of people, not just the people coming along to do the strat planning, but also to key thought leaders, key stakeholders in there. And when we look at the group getting together, the group always misses something major that the actual surveys highlighted. Every single time there's the groupthink of the group getting together, missing a big, shining thing that's staring everyone in the face, that the surveys isolated, but the group just totally missed it. So, and I'd like to say it didn't happen very often. Every single time it happens. Julia.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of hear you, Stephen. I've seen it loads and loads of times as well. There's almost this view that people at the front line don't necessarily have the academic ability or whatever to contribute. And often it's quite the opposite because they're closest to the coalface. And of course, one of the other problems that's sort of related to groupthink and the biases is many a time with these strategy away days, it's who screams the loudest. You know, you've got one person that dominates a room and then everyone kind of follows that person because they don't want to be seen to to sort of undermine the esteemed leader, if you like. So yeah, similar sort of experiences.
Thank you, Stephen and Ben. It's good to hear that the experiences you made are quite similar. So as Stephen, as you mentioned, one approach that of course we suggest or that occurred to us when we talked to companies and wanted to know what they do to overcome those limitations, if they are aware of them, was really a way to open up the entire process, as you said, to many voices. And this is exactly what we then in our work define as open strategy. It is really actively going beyond the boundaries of your executive team, going beyond the boundaries of small teams, and actively involve a whole range of actors outside of those teams in the strategy process. And that could be many different actors. Could be your employees, could also be your customers, your suppliers, experts from institutions, could be founders of startups. We even saw examples where competitors were involved in the strategy process, which is was quite surprising for us. So it's really going beyond those teams. And maybe to just make that more visible, a little story about Barclays, the British bank that did that in a very nice way, I think, when they were facing all those problems in terms of increasing digitalization, a lot of fintechs entering the market, they realized that they have to change their strategy fundamentally, but they also want to do it in a way to make sure that all of their employees are on board when doing some kind of transformation. So what they did, they started out with, I would say, small and having little working groups with people from different functional areas, bringing them together, getting a sense of what's the current state of business is, and also talking with employees that have direct contact with clients. And then they put that together and came up with a first provisional strategic plan. The interesting thing is that they didn't stop here. They went further and they discussed, throughout the entire country, they rented out town halls, cinemas, brought employees together and discussed in a very deep way what that plan would mean for them in their daily business, but also what that would mean for the customer. They refined it further, and they didn't stop here and then set up a multi-day strategy jam, so an online moderated discussion where they invited all of their 30,000 employees to discuss those plans. And what they said was interesting. Of course, they got a lot of additional ideas and saw, okay, what resonates quite well with many people. But in addition, the CEO of the retail business, Ashok Vashwani, told us much more important was really the people really talked about it and read about it and engaged with it. So everybody was already on the same page. Everybody knew what was the discussion, where are they heading. And so after this jam, they very quickly were able to introduce a new digital platform, a new app which became very popular and successful in the UK, gained a lot of a huge market share among the relevant customer groups. And they said they were able to do that quickly and that successful because they didn't have to convince the company and justify their decisions. Everybody was already on the same board. So that is mainly how they opened up the strategy process through different ways and different means. I don't know, Stephen, Ben, if you came across companies that started open initiatives or open up a little bit, maybe at a smaller scale in different ways in their strategy efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's it can be a challenge and it can be quite confronting, I think, also for a CEO. One company that I'm familiar with, they did a similar process. It didn't go quite as far in terms of customers and competitors and suppliers, but certainly internally they opened it up a lot. I think one of the challenges as well, though, is if a CEO or a board have got a fixed view on what their strategy is already, it's almost like it's preordained. They've already decided. It's making sure that they actually listen as well to the voices of their employees and those insights, because I've seen it sort of run partially, and that was almost more destructive than providing those feedback loops to staff and making sure that they understood how that contributed and why certain decisions were made.
Another tweak on this one is a lot of organizations, a lot of boards where they want to do a review of their strategy annually, which we heartily recommend. Because when you're doing a review of your strategy, essentially you're asking key people, and those key people can be expanded out for as far as you like. But essentially, here's our first strategy. What's working? What do you think's working here? Now, what do you think's not working here? Now, what do you think we might have missed under this strategy? What do you think we should put in to this strategy? And then here's our second, and you run it through that sort of process again. We've got one coming up just in a couple of weeks' time where the board, the senior executives get together and they go through that process. But I've seen some organizations where they do that during the year with key staff and key stakeholders. What's working with our key strategies? What's not working with our key strategies? We really want to know. What have we missed? And what do you think we should put in and what do you think we should take out? And that provides a richness and also an engagement in a way that feeds into the planning group, but isn't the planning group. Julia?
Yes, very good points and great examples. And I think it shows, and that's the good thing, that opening up and openness in the strategy process, it's not necessarily just one approach and one tool that you should use. There are many options to do that, many degrees. You don't have to start as broadly as Barclays did and integrate everybody throughout your company through crowdsourcing tools that they did, but you can start quite selectively, because we see, if we talk to companies that want to try that out, you can be overwhelmed if you're not familiar with those processes and those tools. So what we saw and what we suggest is really that you don't just open up somehow, but you have to plan it carefully. And there are certain questions that might help you as an organization along the way to do that. And the questions that we saw are very fundamental is that you really become clear why you do want to open up the strategy. As Stephen mentioned, do you want to get feedback about what worked, what didn't work? Do you want to go quite broad and say, okay, we do have to change our direction in the future? What should be the markets that we are in? What should be the technology that we should focus? Or is it more specifically focusing on a specific initiative that's already there? So what are the reasons? What are your goals? Do you want to source a large number of ideas and go very broadly? Or do you want to engage much more in refining or formulating specific initiatives? The second question is really who should be involved. And as I said, and as we have seen in the examples, could be very different. First step would be to start with your employees. just as Barclays did. And you might see that within your company, you have a huge diversity of perspectives. Some people you might not even be aware of. We talked to guys from Ericsson. They set up an online strategy community where they constantly discuss the strategic future direction of the organization with volunteers throughout the company. And Geraldo, who is responsible for this community, said it's like magic. You can't imagine what people bring to the table when they get into those discussions. So you can decide, or you go outside the company and say, I select specific people from different fields who can bring in those perspectives that might seem unrelated to my industry and my company on the first hand, but might. And then finally is question how to do that. We have seen there are workshop approaches, there are service, there are online tools that you can use, which have very different implications. So to start with the first question, we did a survey among companies in the US and Europe and asked them if they open up their strategy process somehow. And if they did, we asked them, what is their main reason to do so? And we saw, yes, it is about gathering new ideas, get those diverse perspectives. But by far, the most important aspect was really to improve implementation, to get this ownership. And here you see, if that is your goal, if you want to improve implementation, it might be a good step to start within your company, to involve employees, to not go beyond, but and maybe be broad as Barclays did it with their jam. So the second question is then, who do you involve? And this is, of course, linked to your answer to the first question. And here I have a great example from a company producing hearing aids. And what they realized a few years ago, that when they look at the industry producing earbuds, they saw that they are increasing functionality tremendously. So there are examples where artificial intelligence can cancel out voices in the background, but there are also already talks about real-time translation, linking them, of course, to your entertainment system in your house. And if you think about all those functionalities, there's the danger that those earbuds are no longer just entertainment tools, but also have a functionality to help with mild hearing loss. So there is the danger that there are coming in new competitors if you are a hearing aid producer, but they also realize they don't have all the knowledge on artificial intelligence, all those things that might be apps that might be related to all of those questions. So what the company that we talked about, the WS Audiology did, is that they selected quite specifically internals throughout the company, but also people from the outside, people from the MIT Media Lab, from Infineon, IBM Watson, even Intel and Sennheiser might be potential competitors. And in a week's workshop, very intensely developed future scenarios, came up with specific business models, and very deeply engaged in sketching out potential ways to handle such scenarios in the future. And here you can see, here it might make sense to go beyond your employees, to specifically select people that could help you in those discussions. So I don't know, Stephen, Ben, if that would be something that you saw that people from the external world are invited, or if you have the feeling that would be something where companies would have some kind of concerns, or let's say skepticism, or get a little bit scared if they could do that.
I think there's a lot of concerns about bringing outside people in, and I know this because we actually provide advice to these firms when they're doing their strategic planning. They get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 external people, thought leaders involved in the strategy planning. 90% of the boards won't allow it. specifically. And the 10% that do, every single one of them have told me afterwards how amazingly powerful it was to have these people with different perspectives who were respectful but really smart, who would say one thing that would open up the eyes of the rest of the people around there, and at the same time create enormous champions of that particular organisation because they were part of creating the future. So it's wide open for us to really consider this. The only reason I think that it doesn't occur as often as it should is because most people aren't doing it. Ben?
Yeah, look, I totally agree, and I think it's a staggered approach or a stepped approach, if you like, as well, Julia. I mean, I've seen instances where organisations have engaged not just their customers, but their suppliers as well. And we've sort of been through, with COVID and all the rest of it, a period of real sort of supply chain crisis. And this whole approach to partnering, I think, is a lot more powerful. But it is daunting as well. I think it can be a bit daunting, particularly where some of those people, if you're caught in if you like, an industry-wide value chain and they wield a lot of power, there's always the risk as well that, you become acquired by your supplier or, et cetera. So engaging them, I think, is powerful. It's powerful from a partnering perspective because often you're dependent on them, whether they're a supplier or a customer. But it's just doing it, carefully.
There's a great question that's been asked by Rada that says, when inviting a competitor, what could make the competitor contribute? Do you know the fun bit about that is, I guarantee if you were to ask 8 people to be part of your strat planning and they were competitors, you would get 5 to 6 saying yes. Why would they do it? Because they were asked. It's that simple.
Exactly, that's a very good point, and we see that a lot of people. I mean, if we participate in those workshops and they are week long, typically those externals they are not paid for doing that. They are just coming to also be able to discuss what's the future in our industry, to set up some relationships out of curiosity. So there are many reasons, but it is never money, so it's never extrinsic motivation. But there were very good points mentioned. If you open up, of course, it's good to do that carefully. And throughout all the examples also that we discussed in the book, we were amazed what type of companies we found to open up. Companies that you think might be the most secretive ones. So we found examples of NASA, of the US Navy, even the US intelligence community. So the CIA, they were applying open principles and shaping their strategies, of course, under certain conditions and with careful considerations, but they opened up to the external world, even through crowdsourcing mechanisms. But you, of course, have to handle careful how you set it up, and there are good ways to do that carefully. So maybe we go on to the last example, and I just want to talk very briefly about that. We go to the last question, the tools, and I think we have talked about different examples that give you a feeling about what might be some pros and cons about going small, going into workshops, having a very selected group of people that you can maybe more carefully select and control, where you can go very deep into complex issues. Of course, you have less diversity here, or you are responsible to create this diversity and select specific people that can contribute. On the other hand, if you go broad with crowdsourcing tools, with community tools, with network tools, you have this diversity, people self-select. But of course, in those crowds, you have carefully managed and moderate the discussions to not losing control. And that's possible. We have seen this with this example of Telefonica. They have an employee social network where all of their 125,000 employees engage in constant discussion. And the people responsible here said over all the years that they have this, they only had to delete one post because it was not appropriate. Otherwise, there is a really very, very constructive discussion going on. One point that I want to make without going into further detail on that story is why this is working at Telefonica and why they get so broad commitment in those discussions. One reason is really their CEO. The CEO here is really engaging a lot personally and is very present on this network and engage a lot in those discussions and takes the ideas that are submitted there and refers to them in his speeches, in his talks. People can see that those ideas are taken, that they are built on, that they are combined, and that they get realized. Of course, not all of them, but many of them are at least considered and are referred to. So they really see that they are taken seriously in their contributions. And I think this example shows a lot how the roles of leaders, of CEOs, of executives can shape the success of opening up. Because very often when we talk to leaders, they say, yeah, you convinced me, openness makes a lot of sense. I see it works with all those examples, but our company is a little bit different. It doesn't work with us because, or there are some concerns. I don't know, Stephen, Ben, what your takes are on that if you talk with the people. Are you having the same feeling?
Let me just tell you a very, very brief story. This is going on as we speak. There's a wonderful organisation in Tasmania based in Launceston called Door of Hope Christian Church. Mm-hmm. And they decided to do an open strategy, and we were involved in helping set this up. They went out to their 5,000 or 6,000 congregation, and they asked them all to write a story about what they would like to see their community in 50 years' time. And not to try and solve it, just to tell us what would you like to see our community be in 50 years' time. They did keyword analysis on that and developed up some word maps around that. And there were 4 very key themes that came out from that. That was used as an impetus for when the actual strategy planning of the day was being developed. That provided the pillars that just made obvious sense when you're able to see it. And from that, they were not only able to develop up 4 very, very clear strategies around digitization and a range of other things, authentic voices and so on, but they had the input from over 5,000 people in a way that was actually really powerful. Everyone is waiting to see and wanting to be part of creating that future.
That's
we have a question in from Talat here. He says, if external advisors are engaged by the board, there should be robust probity requirements and process set up by the board, such as conflicts, declarations, etc. Thoughts on that?
Should do it anyway, whether it's part of strategy setting or whether you've got some sort of assignment with them. That's part of the course. So agreed.
Yeah.
Ben?
On the competitor side, Julia, a good example of a random one that's related to disruption is when I was in the recorded music industry and it was disrupted, the major labels did get together and try to build something like iTunes. So the competitors all got together, but they were accused of price fixing by the regulators. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, I mean, that's an example of competitors coming together in a distressed situation, and then the regulators, intervening, if you like. Interesting.
Yeah, interesting point. Yes, there are, of course, specific situations and examples where specific rules apply. What we found in the end, talking to a lot of different people, is it boils down to the individual level. So am I really ready to admit that it might be helpful, that I don't know everything, and that it might be helpful to gain input from the outside world? Do I really admit that people who are not necessarily having a lot of expertise or experience in my field and in my industry can really contribute very valuable information and insights? And I think it has to do to still not feeling, let's say, having a loss of status or loss of control in my specific role as a leader. So what we found is that it's important that people at the top of organizations are really ready for strategy, that they say, yes, I'm feeling comfortable, even if there is a little bit serendipity in terms of what I get, in terms of contributions. I do not feel that I'm giving up some kind of power or status. I do not feel that this is a problem for my role as a leader, but I see that I just got a lot of valuable information that I can use in my work and that contributes to my work. And if you ask people if they are open, I think if I would ask all of you and also the participants, everybody would say, yes, of course, I'm open to diversity and to more inclusion and diverse thought. But if we then go a little bit deeper into specific questions, sometimes the picture is not so clear. So we set up some very basic questions. And if you follow this QR code, you get a first examples of them that help you personally to assess, would I be feeling comfortable with opening up? Where are the areas where I might need to work on myself? To be able to make some first steps to open strategy also in my organization. So that's from my side. Steve and Ben, I'm happy to hear your thoughts also on the individual level and additional thoughts on the topic in general.
Yeah, I think, firstly, Julia, I think it's great to have you presenting Down Under. I think a lot of the ideas that I've had with FlipView in terms of risk and strategy and kind of engaging frontline staff really resonate. You know, it's a similar sort of ethos and philosophy, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think I absolutely think it's a way forward, and I think a big part of it is engagement and buy-in. And one of the things I often talk about when I've run strategy away days and that sort of stuff is, you know, a simple strategy understood by many is a lot more powerful and a lot easier, you know, than a complex strategy understood by few. And I think the world is changing. And so, you know, I think this idea of opening things up is extremely powerful. Very, very powerful.
Last words from you, Stephen.
Over to you, Sean.
Well done. Very good. So look, please reach out to Julia, Stephen, Ben on LinkedIn with these details here. I'm sure they will welcome your connection. But also draw you to your attention, our masterclasses coming up. There's one in December. We still have seats for that, how to write better board papers. And the others are in the new year. So how to be and think strategic with Stephen Bowman, creating a winning board resume with Lisa Cook, and how to be a great board chair. You can find out all about those masterclass programs on our webinar page on our website. So as I said in the opening, when you leave this particular webinar, there'll be a little survey that'll pop up. If you could just complete that for us, it'll only take you a minute. Give us some feedback, and you will go in the draw to win one of the books from Julia Haut's Open Strategy, Mastering Disruption from Outside the C-Suite. So that is us for today. Everybody, thank you for popping along at this hour. Really appreciate it. That is the last webinar for the year. We look forward to seeing you again in the new year starting February 1. Thanks again, everybody. And Julia, thank you so much for your input today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed this conversation.
It's been an honor, Julia. Thank you.